The wall was colder than he'd expected, but it wasn't the ice that made Tyrion Lannister pause on the top of the world. It was the silence, that dreadful, endless quiet. As snow drifted across his boots, he realized he didn't want to go back to the squabbles of King's Landing. Not yet, not ever, perhaps. Benjen Stark had already left. Jon was being buried in duties. And he was a Lannister with no love for his family's games. Cersei's cruelty, Jaime's blind loyalty, and Tywin's suffocating expectations all seemed more unbearable now than ever before. He wanted out. When the merchant ship from White Harbor spoke of a journey across the narrow sea toward Pentos, Tyrion listened. One could always drink across the sea, he figured, and perhaps find something more interesting than King Robert's belly or Littlefinger's scheming whispers. He left no note, just coin. Enough for the night's watch to buy another barrel of mead in his name. In Pentos, Tyrion was welcomed not as a Lannister, but as a man of gold and curiosity. Illyrio Mopatis was a gracious host too gracious. Tyrion had learned early on to beware of rich men bearing food and smiles. Still, he played along, feasted and drank, until one evening when he caught wind of whispers. The Dragon Queen, a Targaryen girl, married off to a Dothraki call, Illyrio had said, feigning casualness. Tyrion narrowed his eyes. A girl with dragons? Eggs, Illyrio corrected with a smirk. But they are hers, and in time, who knows what may hatch. That was enough to ignite the flicker of curiosity in Tyrion's clever heart. A dethroned queen, married to a savage warlord, wandering the sands of Essos with 3 dragon eggs, and the last name that haunted his father's nightmares? He wanted to see this girl. It took bribery, patience, and more than one nearly fatal negotiation to catch up with her colliser, riding east past the Dothraki Sea. By the time Tyrion found her, Daenerys Targaryen was no longer the trembling girl sold by her brother. She sat tall beside Khal Drogo, her silver hair braided with pearls, eyes calm like frozen lakes. He approached with caution. Dothraki blades glinted around him. His small stature drew sneers and laughter until he spoke. "Tell your queen," he said in their tongue, rough but passable, "that a lion has wandered far to see the dragons." Daenerys didn't have him killed. She was too intrigued. They spoke that night. Her questions were sharp. His answers were sharper. He told her stories of Westeros' truthful ones, without the mask, of how her father had earned madness, how Robert sat drunk on a throne of boredom, how Viserys had been a fool from the start. "You don't speak like a Lannister," she said. "I don't much like them either," he replied, sipping wine from a Dothraki clay cup. By the time the moon rose again, she had offered him a place among her people. Not as a fighter, not as a rider, but as an advisor. A mind in exile. Khal Drogo, less than thrilled, allowed it only because Daenerys insisted, and because Tyrion amused him. Weeks passed. Tyrion learned the ways of the Dothraki. Crude, brutal, yet honest. He rode clumsily, but he listened sharply. He watched Daenerys grow, watched how the fire sparked behind her eyes when she spoke of justice, of reclaiming her throne not for revenge, but for balance. "Your dragons," Tyrion said one night, staring at the fossilized eggs, "they will not stay stone forever. Not with what burns inside you. You believe they'll hatch? I believe in stories and in you." The Targaryen girl smiled, and for the first time in years, Tyrion felt like he wasn't just running from his family. He was running toward something greater. But fate is a cruel weaver. Viserys hadn't vanished yet, and neither had King Robert's spies. Tyrion would soon learn that being near Daenerys wasn't just dangerous, it was destiny's way of throwing him into a fire that would reshape all of Westeros. Tyrion had only been with the Kelliser for a few weeks when trouble stirred. Like storm winds over dry grass, he had grown used to the thundering of horse hooves, the reek of sweat and blood, and the guttural laughter of warriors around the fire. He even found amusement in their crude jests at his size. But nothing unnerved him more than the venom behind Viserys Targaryen's eyes. The so-called true dragon watched Tyrion like a starving man watches a banquet just out of reach. Viserys hated him openly, bitterly, not for his name, but for the influence he now had over Daenerys. Tyrion's wit and worldly wisdom had replaced Viserys' threats and tantrums. The self-proclaimed king had been reduced to a brother in name only, and he couldn't bear it. "You poison her," Viserys spat one night, confronting Tyrion by the fireside, his words slurred with stolen wine. "You whisper lies in her ear, turn her against her own blood." "I hardly need to whisper," Tyrion said with a lazy smile, not even looking up from his cup. "You do all the damage yourself with your loud stupidity." Viserys lunged, knife half drawn, but a single glare from Ser Jorah Mormont stayed his hand. The knight had begun to respect Tyrion, or at least his usefulness. And Daenerys? She had stopped flinching when her brother shouted. She listened now too. Tyrion. But even as her confidence grew, the whispers did too. Whispers of assassins. Gold cloaks seen in Pentos. Spies slipping into the east. King Robert Baratheon had not forgotten the Dragon Princess, and now with news that she was pregnant. With Khal Drogo's child, his fear had turned to fury. One night, under a violet sky, Daenerys sat in her tent, hand resting on her belly. "If Robert truly wants me dead," she said quietly, "will he kill my child too?" Tyrion looked at her, something painful stirring in his chest. He had always enjoyed politics, cruelty, and games. But this was different. "Yes," he said. He would. She didn't cry. She just nodded. That same night, a Winnisler came to offer gifts. A sweet cask from Les, rare and rich. Daenerys reached for the goblet, but Tyrion's eye caught a tremble in the man's wrist. A breath too shallow. A glance too nervous. "Let me taste it first," he said casually, taking the cup. The Winnisler flinched, and in seconds Jorah had him pinned to the dust. Poison. A royal order, no doubt. Sent across continents to silence a womb that carried Targaryen blood. Daenerys was shaken, but not broken. Her eyes, once soft, turned cold. The next morning, she stood before her Kelliser and spoke in broken Dothraki, clear enough to shake the sky. "They would kill my son," she said. "And the man who saved us," she gestured to Tyrion. "He is not blood of my blood, but he is fire of my fire. I name him the dragon's mind." Tyrion, stunned, blinked. He had been mocked, beaten, pitied, and scorned all his life. No one had ever given him a title that meant anything. Until now. Later that day, Khal Drogo, boiling with rage over the attempted murder, took his blood riders and made a vow. "I will give her the Iron Throne," he growled. "I will take my Kelliser across the poison water. I will kill the men in iron suits and burn their stone houses." And so it began. Not just the fire, but the war to come. Tyrion sat alone that night, looking at the dragon eggs by firelight. They seemed warmer, more alive. And he whispered to himself, "What in seven hells have I gotten into?" He didn't yet know that this decision joining her in that dusty sea would not only change the fate of Daenerys Targaryen, it would doom House Lannister forever. The march began before the sun rose. Khal Drogo's Kelliser moved like a river of muscle, and steel thousands of horses kicking up dust that clung to the horizon like smoke. And in the center of it all, Daenerys rode tall, silver hair unbound, her stomach rounding with the weight of her unborn son, And beside her, Tyrion Lannister. No longer just a passenger. No longer a dwarf in exile. No, he was her voice in strategy, her eye for detail, her answer to Westeros. They moved east toward the city of Qarth to gather ships, allies, and attention. Tyrion had suggested it after reading old merchant maps Illyrio had gifted him. Qarth had wealth, pride, and most importantly, an open gate to the seas that led back west. It would be their first taste of diplomacy, and their first test as a political force. You cannot ride into Qarth with blood on your hair and blades. At your back, Tyrion warned Drogo. They respect power, yes, but they also fear chaos. Drogo had grunted. If they fear us, they will obey. Tyrion didn't argue. Not because he agreed, but because Daenerys smiled and said, "Let them see us coming." Qarth, for all its grandeur, stank of pretense. The 13 merchant rulers welcomed Daenerys and her Khaleesi, but their eyes never stopped counting her soldiers, her horses, her dragon eggs. Tyrion could see it in their smiles, the greed. He stayed close to her during every audience, speaking when she needed diplomacy, staying silent when she needed strength. And Qarth listened. She was young, foreign, pregnant, and terrifyingly composed. A queen wrapped in silver, carried by warriors, and guarded by the most dangerous secret in the world. Tyrion found allies among the scholars. He drank with spice lords, traded words with pirates, and even met warlocks who offered illusions in exchange for secrets. But none dared touch the dragon eggs, not while Drogo lived. One night, under the hanging lanterns of the palace garden, Daenerys turned to Tyrion. "You've been quiet. Qarth reeks of liars." "I'm trying to breathe through my mouth," he quipped, and added more softly, "They want to use you." "I know," she said. "That's why I have you." He looked at her then, really looked. She was no longer the girl he had found in the dust. Her softness remained, but it was hidden under layers of fire. And it scared him how much he believed in her. But even he couldn't see what was coming next. The night the dragons hatched, the sky over Qarth split open. It began with screams echoing through the guest palace like a wave of slaughter. Blood riders stormed through the halls. Servants disappeared. And in the chaos, Tyrion saw the silhouette of a thief running with something wrapped in silk. "A dragon egg," he shouted. He gave chase, cursing his short legs, lungs burning as he chased the figure through the shadowed corridors. The thief was fast, too fast. But Tyrion was clever. He threw a candlestick, his only weapon, at the man's leg, toppling him just long enough for a blood rider to catch up and crush the thief's skull. But it was too late. The egg had cracked. When Tyrion returned it to Daenerys, it was warm, pulsing, alive. She didn't speak. She just took it in her hands and wept. And that night, she walked into fire. No one understood at first. Not Drogo, not Jorah, not even Tyrion. But they followed, terrified. She stood before a pyre, wrapped the cracked egg in cloth, and laid it atop burning coals. Her brother Viserys' crown, still molten from the night Drogo had killed him, was added to the flames. Then she stepped into the blaze. Tyrion screamed. Jorah tried to stop her, but the fire didn't take her. It accepted her. When the flames died, she stood in the ashes, clothes burned to threads, hair like molten silver. And from the cracked egg in her arms, a hatchling stirred. The dragon was real, small but alive, screeching its birth song to the stars. And Qarth would never forget that night, nor would the world. Tyrion didn't kneel. But for the first time, he thought, perhaps I should have. The dragon's cry echoed through the marble halls of Qarth like the wail of a new god. People spoke of it in whispers, in prayers, in terror. The 13 no longer looked at Daenerys in the eyes. Some offered gifts. Others sent guards to shadow her every step. A few vanished overnight, leaving behind only blood-smeared beds and locked doors. Power had shifted, and Tyrion Lannister was at the heart of it. He stood at her side as the small dragon clung to Daenerys' shoulder, its eyes glowing like coals. The creature was no longer myth. It was flesh and flame. The news spread faster than ravens carried by fear, greed, and awe. And across the sea in Westeros, it would reach King's Landing like a blade in the back. "Do you understand what you've done?" Tyrion asked her, days after the hatching, as the creature slept coiled around her arm like a serpent. "I was born to do this," Daenerys said, her voice calm. "They took everything from my family. I will take it back." Tyrion believed her. But belief came with a cost. Khal Drogo, once confident in the strength of his Khalasar, began to feel the weight of something greater, something he didn't understand. Dragons were not of the Horse Lords. They were not of the old gods. And the more people bowed to Daenerys, the more Drogo's pride burned. He loved her, yes, fiercely. But love does not always survive power. You let them treat you like a king, Tyrion warned him one evening after a meeting with a nervous Qartheen warlord. But your wife is more than a queen now, she's a symbol. I am her call, Drogo said, chest heaving. She rides for me. She rides for something else now, Tyrion murmured. And if you don't see it, you will lose her. Or worse, you'll stand in her way. That didn't sit well. Not with a man like Drogo, but he said nothing. As the days turned, Daenerys' plans sharpened. Qarth offered them ship's-old ones, rotting at the hull, but fixable. Enough to carry the beginnings of an army. Tyrion helped negotiate each detail. He paid with charm, threats, and gold. Ser Jorah gathered swords. The Khalasar, restless with city walls and silks, prepared to move again. But not everyone welcomed the fire. One night, a knock echoed on Tyrion's chamber door. It was Jorah. "Drogo's hurt," he said. Hurt was an understatement. The Khal lay sweating and delirious, a long gash festering on his side. He had fallen from his horse after a skirmish outside the city, too proud to let the wound be treated by healers. He called weak. Infection had set in. Daenerys stayed by his side for 3 days, refusing to eat or sleep. Tyrion tried to reason with her. So did Jorah, but grief is louder than wisdom. She turned to a healer, a shadow-skulled woman from the markets of Asshai, the same one Tyrion had once warned her about. "She's not just a healer," he'd said. "She's something darker." "I'll pay any price," Daenerys whispered, clutching Drogo's hand. And so the ritual began. Smoke choked the sky. Blood ran into the soil. Screams human and not pierced the night. Tyrion watched it all, helpless, angry, terrified. When the fire died down, Drogo still breathed. But he did not wake. He never would. His eyes were open, but empty. His body alive, but soulless. A shell. Daenerys broke that day. She wept like a widow, alone before the gods. She screamed into the sky until her throat bled. She locked herself away for days. Tyrion waited until she emerged. She didn't cry anymore. She burned the healer alive. And then she summoned every blood rider, every shipmaster, every soul who had sworn her loyalty. Tyrion stood with her as she stepped before them all with her child in her arms. Her child and her dragon. "Drogo is gone," she said, voice steady. "But I am not. You followed a call. Now follow a queen. The last of House Targaryen, the mother of dragons." The crowd did not cheer. They knelt. And Tyrion whispered to himself, "7 hells, we've crossed the point of no return." The ships creaked and groaned like dying animals as they pushed away from the harbor of Qarth, carrying more than just warriors and horses. They carried a storm. A storm of vengeance, of prophecy, of fire and blood, and Tyrion Lannister knew. He was now tied to the very heart of it. The sea voyage was brutal. The ships, barely seaworthy, tossed the Calliser like coins in a storm. Horses screamed, men vomited over the rails, and more than one bloodrider threatened to kill the water itself. But Daenerys did not flinch. She stood at the prow of the largest ship, her dragon now named Drogon perched on her shoulder, its wings twitching with the wind. Tyrion had never hated the sea more. He spent most nights coughing and cursing into a bucket, his short legs braced against the floor to keep from being hurled across the cabin. Ser Jorah fared little better. But still, the planning never stopped. Daenerys met with them nightly, laying maps out on soaked wood, asking about Westeros, its lords, its alliances, its weak points. "I don't just want the throne," she told Tyrion one evening as waves slammed against the hull. "I want to tear out the rot. All of it." "That's a long list," Tyrion muttered. "Start with Cersei and work your way down." Her eyes narrowed. "Your sister will die screaming." Tyrion didn't disagree, but her tone, flat, cold, final, sent a shiver through him. Still, he advised her, told her which lords might bend the knee, which houses hated the Lannisters enough to join her cause. He warned her that the people of Westeros didn't know her. They only knew her name, and that name came with fire and death. If she wanted to rule, she would need to win hearts, not just burn castles. But the dragon growing on her shoulder didn't understand hearts. It understood only hunger. By the time they reached Slaver's Bay, the heat had replaced the cold of the sea. Tyrion was grateful to have his feet on land again, even if that land stank of sweat, gold, and chains. Daenerys stood outside the gates of Estaper, staring at a row of chained unsullied. Their eyes were hollow, their spears perfect. They were the best army gold could buy, and the most inhuman. Tyrion watched her closely, waiting to see the girl he once knew hesitate. But she didn't. She bought every last one, with gold, with threats, and with something deeper. She promised them freedom, promised they could choose. And they did. They chose her. The slavers laughed, until the dragon burned them alive. Tyrion didn't sleep that night. Not because he was afraid. He was far past that point. But because, for the first time in his life, he realized he had hitched himself to something unstoppable. Not a girl, not even a queen. A force. When they took young Kai, it was less a battle than a warning. Tyrion watched from the hills as Unsullied stormed. The city in silence, precision, and utter terror. The masters screamed for mercy. Daenerys gave them none. The slaves were freed. The palaces burned. She stood atop the gates and let Drogon scream fire into the sky. And they cheered her name. Mother, Missa. The crowds chanted, hands raised. In trembling devotion, Tyrion stood behind her, his hand on the pommel of his belt dagger, heart pounding. He had been Hand of the King once. Now he was the voice behind a queen who could end the world if she felt like it. That night, as the fires still flickered in the horizon, Daenerys sat with Tyrion beside the war table. Her face was drawn, tired, but her eyes, they were sharper than ever. "They cheered for me today," she said. "They feared you," Tyrion replied. "Is there a difference?" He looked at her long and hard. "Only until the moment they stop." She leaned forward. "Then we make sure they never do." He poured himself a drink. "That's what scares me." Outside, Drogon circled overhead, a shadow in the moonlight. And across the sea in King's Landing, ravens screamed warnings that no one would take seriously until the fire reached their doorsteps. The raven landed in the Red Keep just after sunrise, its wings soaked from sea spray, its scroll sealed in black wax. Cersei Lannister read the message with narrowed eyes, her lips curling as she took in every word. Daenerys Targaryen, Dragonborn, the breaker of chains, the queen across the sea. The list of titles alone made her furious. She has an army, she spat, unsullied, freed slaves. And dragons. Tywin, seated in his chamber in silence, tapped the table slowly with 2 fingers. Shyam stood beside the door, arms crossed, his golden hand reflecting the morning. Light. A threat, Tywin said coldly, but not yet a war. She's burning cities, Cersei hissed. She's building alliances. She's coming. And who's whispering in her ear? Tywin asked. That imp. Our little mistake. They all knew who had helped her plan, who had advised her every step, who had named the houses to court and the ones to destroy. Tyrion, the traitor son of Lannister. But while King's Landing debated and denied, across the sea, Daenerys continued her conquest, not for gold, but for loyalty. She moved with the yaw. Precision of a ruler and the rage of a storm. Meereen fell faster than even Tyrion expected. The slavers tried to fight. They died screaming. The slaves did not just cheer, they followed. An army without chains, marching for a queen who once walked through fire. And yet, Tyrion saw something troubling beneath the triumph. The dragon, had grown, faster than natural. Hungrier. 2. Its wings now cast wide shadows across entire districts. It no longer listened to Jorah. It barely listened to Daenerys. Sometimes it flew for days, returning with blood on its jaws and bone between its teeth. It's a child, she said. Once. A wild one. Yes, but mine. Children grow, Tyrion warned. And this one may outgrow your control. Daenerys said nothing, but her hand gripped the dragon's leather reins a little tighter. It wasn't just Dragon. The Unsullied, too, had changed. Once disciplined, silent warriors, they now moved with fanatical loyalty. They wore red sashes stitched with the sigil of the dragon. They painted flames on their shields. They called her not just queen, but savior. Tyrion had seen this before, how adoration became blindness, how loyalty became madness. And when she began crucifying the former masters, hundreds of them, lining the roads outside Meereen, Tyrion confronted her. You're becoming what your father was, he said coldly. Daenerys looked at him like a stranger. My father burned men alive because he enjoyed it. I do it to remind the world what justice means. Justice isn't just your definition, Daenerys. Justice must bend to reason. She stood, voice rising. I freed those cities. I gave them dignity. And if fire is what it takes to keep it, then so be it. Tyrion felt it then. Not fear. Disappointment. She had once listened. Questioned. Balanced mercy with judgment. Now her words fell like verdicts, not arguments. And the people who followed her, they didn't want a queen. They wanted a goddess. Later that night, Ser Jorah approached him, quiet as always. She's not the girl we met, he said. No, Tyrion replied, swirling his wine. She's something far more dangerous. But it was too late to turn back. The ships had been repaired, the armies fed, the dragons grown. And Westeros, with all its fractured kingdoms and rotting alliances, was waiting, squabbling over chairs, blind to the smoke rising from the east. One evening, Daenerys called her council. Tyrion, Jorah, Grey Worm, Missandei, and 2 new allies, Yara Greyjoy and Ellaria Sand, each bringing ships and blood-soaked vengeance. We sail within the week, she announced. The 7 kingdoms are divided. Their lords are weak, and they still kneel to the woman who blew up her own sept. Tyrion flinched. Cersei, the one person more unstable than Daenerys. This will be a reckoning, she said, for Robert, for Rhaegar, for Viserys, for Drogo, for every child who died because a crown chose war. And for your own child? Tyrion asked quietly, glancing at her belly. Daenerys froze. Only he knew. Only he had guessed. She hadn't spoken of it. Not since the night she collapsed in her tent, sick from wine she hadn't touched in weeks. She met his eyes, soft for just a moment. For him most of all. And so they sailed. Across the narrow sea, with dragons overhead, with spears below. And with Tyrion Lannister watching from the prow, his heart split between pride and dread. Because he had helped build this storm. And he wasn't sure anyone could stop it now. The narrow sea roared beneath the hulls of Daenerys' fleet, 1,000 sails swelling with wind, bearing not just an army, but judgment. Tyrion stood at the bow of the lead ship, the salt air biting his face, eyes fixed on the distant gray. Line of Westeros, his homeland. A place that had mocked him, used him, and tried to kill him. And now he returned, not as a Lannister, but as the right hand of a conqueror. Behind him, the sea stretched with the largest fleet Essos had seen. In a century Greyjoy longships, Dornish vessels, Carthene barges, and patched-up slave ships turned war machines. Dragons circled above like the wrath of gods, shadows passing over the waves. Drogon had grown monstrous, his wingspan wide enough to blot out towns. Viserion and Rhaegal trailed close, their shrieks shaking the sky. Daenerys remained below, silent, withdrawn. Since leaving Meereen, she had changed. Her eyes were sharper, her tone colder. Even her smile had vanished, replaced by a quiet rage that never seemed to dim. Tyrion had once feared she might become her father. Now he feared she might become something worse. The fleet made landfall on the shores of Dragonstone, the ancestral seat of House Targaryen, abandoned and dust-covered, but still standing. Black stone, narrow halls, thrones carved from cooled lava. It was the perfect place for fire to return. Daenerys walked those halls with reverence and fury. She touched the carved dragons like they were old friends, then turned to her council. With a single demand, send ravens. To whom? Tyrion asked. She turned her back to them and stared into the great hall. To all of them, lords, ladies, knights, bastards, tell them the queen has returned. Tyrion understood what she meant. Not a queen asking for support. A queen summoning obedience. I'll draft the messages, he said quietly. Over the next few days, allies were named. Enemies were marked. Strategy began. Yara and Theon Greyjoy would attack the Lannister fleet. Ellaria would cut into the Reach. Grey Worm and the Unsullied would march for Casterly Rock, Tyrion's old home. He didn't object. Not publicly. But in private, he approached Daenerys in her chambers. You want to take the Iron Throne, fine. Burn a few gates, spill some blood. That's how kings and queens do it. Her gaze didn't shift. But if you burn everything just to sit on ashes, you'll rule alone. She turned, voice a whisper. Do you think I came all this way to ask permission? Tyrion met her stare. I think you came all this way to prove something. And I'm terrified of what you'll do to make your point. Outside, Drogon shrieked. A storm brewed on the sea. And then came the Raven. From Varys. King's Landing had changed. Cersei now sat the throne, draped in black. Tommen was dead. Margaery dead, the sept of Baelor gone, burned by wildfire. She's not ruling, Varys wrote. She's punishing. Tyrion read the scroll twice, then handed it to Daenerys. She's already doing what you intend to. That gave her pause. But only for a moment. Then we'll see who punishes better, Daenerys said. The war began like a thunderclap. Yara's fleet clashed with Euron steel against storm. Blood soaked the sea. Tyrion watched through the flames as ships vanished beneath waves, as fire rained from the sky. Viserion torched a dozen galleys with one breath. And still, Euron survived, slipping away like a ghost. The Unsullied marched fast, taking Casterly Rock in a week. Tyrion had designed the sewer tunnels himself. The irony stung. But Daenerys didn't even pause to celebrate. Instead, she mounted Drogon and flew north straight toward the Lannister. Supply train headed from Highgarden. Tyrion rode behind her, heart pounding. He watched from a hill as dragons descended like apocalypse, fire roaring across golden fields, wagons exploding, soldiers scattering like ants. The Lannisters screamed. Some burned, some knelt. Most died. Tyrion wanted to be proud. He wasn't. He rode down to the ashes afterward. Found Jaime, bleeding and dazed. Found charred bodies that no longer looked like men. She's doing it, Jaime rasped, eyes wide with disbelief. She's becoming the Mad King's daughter. Tyrion didn't argue, because in his heart, he feared it was true. Smoke hung over King's Landing like a curse, heavy and unmoving. The city stank of fear, the kind that seeps into stone and skin. Tyrion Lannister stood atop the walls of Dragonstone, watching the black clouds on the horizon. With a heart full of dread, it had come to this. Cersei had refused surrender. Despite the losses, despite the dragons, despite the realm splitting beneath her, she chose pride over peace. She dared Daenerys to come, dared her to burn it all. And Daenerys accepted the dare. The council tried to reason with her one last time. Varys begged. Jorah pleaded. Tyrion argued with every scrap of wit he had left. "If you burn the city," he said, voice shaking, "you'll win the war, yes, but you'll lose the world. I don't want the world's love," she whispered. "I want its respect." "No," Tyrion said softly. "You want its obedience." That night, he made a choice. A final betrayal or an act of loyalty, depending on how history would rag it. He freed Jaime, who had been captured while trying to reach Cersei, told him where the secret passage lay beneath the Red Keep, told him to take Cersei and flee. "Don't argue. Just go," Tyrion had said. "You're all she has. And I have no one left to disappoint." The bells rang the next day, not for surrender, for judgment. Daenerys flew alone at first. Drogon's wings cracked the sky, his roar louder than any bell. Tyrion stood near the gates of the city, watching. It unfolded like a nightmare dressed in glory. The Iron Fleet burned in minutes. The Golden Company slaughtered before they even drew swords. The gates crumbled like parchment. And then came the moment Tyrion would relive forever. The Lannister army dropped their weapons. Civilians screamed for mercy. The bells did ring for surrender. The Red Keep stood intact. The city had given in. And Daenerys ignored it. She looked down at the city that had mocked her, that had torn her family from the throne, that had forced her to claw her way through fire and blood. And she unleashed Drogon. The dragon's fire poured like hell over the streets. Men, women, children, none were spared. Tyrion fell to his knees as the screams began, not for strategy, not for justice, for vengeance. He ran through the carnage, breath shallow, eyes burning. He saw mothers clutching ash. He saw streets turn to molten rivers. He saw the Red Keep collapse into dust as Drogon brought down centuries of stone and history. And in the crypts beneath, Jaime and Cersei died holding each other, buried in the very kingdom they'd once ruled. Tyrion found them days later, beneath rubble and bone. He wept, not because they deserved better, but because he had tried. And it wasn't enough. When he returned to Daenerys, her army stood triumphant, the Unsullied, spears raised. Dothraki, roaring in joy. Drogon perched on the ruins like a crowned god. And Daenerys stood above it all, her face lit not with remorse but glory. "This is the beginning," she said, "not the end." Tyrion took off his pin, the hand of the queen, and dropped it into the dust. "I won't follow a butcher." She stared at him, cold as winter. "Then you will die like one." They took him in chains. That night, Jon Snow came to his cell. "She's not the woman I knew," Jon said, voice hollow. "She is exactly who I feared she'd become," Tyrion whispered. "And you're the only one left who can stop her." Jon didn't speak, but Tyrion saw it in his eyes, the doubt, the grief, the duty. It was done the next day. Daenerys walked through the shattered halls of the Red Keep, her vision finally realized. But as she turned, Jon approached quiet, gentle. He kissed her. Then he drove a dagger into her heart. She gasped, not in anger, not in rage, but in disbelief. Her dream, her throne, her destiny, ending in a whisper. Drogon screamed. He found her body, nudged her limp form, and roared with a pain no man could measure. But he didn't kill Jon. Instead, he turned and burned the Iron Throne, melting it into slag, then flew away, carrying her into the mist. Tyrion was freed, broken, but alive. He stood among what was left: ash, bones, silence. In the end, he had tried to change fate. He had tried to tame a dragon with logic, to mold a queen with reason. But fire doesn't listen, and power never weeps. And so he lived with the weight of knowing that he had helped build the fire that destroyed a kingdom, and would be remembered not as a hero, but as the man who whispered into the ear of a dragon,